everybody. This week for my vignette, I am doing chapter 7, which is all about vocabulary, and I'm doing option number 4. So there's a couple of words that I put on my note cards that are going to be my key talking points today. Like I said, this chapter is all about vocabulary. So that's the main point of this whole chapter, and this vignette is focused specifically on the strategies and teaching techniques that you can use to introduce new vocabulary to your students. So the vignette is about Mrs. Barney's 8th grade students, and they're doing a thematic unit on the Middle Ages. So they're learning a lot of new words that they might not have a lot of background experience with. So Mrs. Barney does a lot of different things in her unit, but I'm going to focus on a couple of key things that she does that I think really help the students to acquire and use the vocabulary that they're learning, not just learn it once and then forget about it, because I feel like that happens a lot. So the main thing that Mrs. Barney does is create an interactive and ongoing word wall with her students. So using a word wall for vocabulary purposes is really important, not just for high frequency words and words that students use a lot. That's also necessary just to use as a reference for spelling. But word walls specifically for thematic units are really important because they not only are there for the students to use if they need a reference point, but they also are a constant reminder that there's more to learn about that word, or there's more that we can dive into about that word. So word walls are really important. So another thing that we're going to be talking about today that Mrs. Barney does is talk about root words and also synonyms. And this is all stemming from her word wall that she creates. So you're going to see that just from creating one word wall for a thematic unit, you can have countless mini lessons about the words themselves. And the more you get your kids to use the words, the more they're going to understand them and retain them. So I made a little word wall, and typically a word wall has all of the letters. This is just a way to organize it. So you have all of the letters alphabetically, and then as you're doing your readings, you can pick words to go on the word wall. So sometimes the teacher will pick the words, and sometimes the students will pick the words. It depends. The students have the option to add a word to the word wall, and then they can all explore the word together. And then if there's a word that the teacher thinks needs to be addressed that hasn't been addressed yet, they can add the word to the word wall as well. So I just picked a couple of the words that the students are learning about for each letter here. And so you can set it up any way you want. I think that Mrs. Barney had her set up in sort of a like a box chart. So there's countless ways you can do that. So one of the lessons that Mrs. Barney did was talking about origin and root words. So for the origin, a cool thing that they did was talk about where each word comes from. Maybe not each word, but some select words. So for example, they talked about how the word night, which is right here, night, and the word drawbridge are both English origin. So they come from English. They are primarily found in the English origin. Lute, on the other hand, which is right here, is of French origin. And then illumination is of Latin origin. So just finding words on your word wall and simply telling your students where that word comes from not only helps them understand the word better, but I think it's also really cool to see how many influences there are on the language that we use every single day. Because I don't think a lot of people realize that, it's not just Greek and Latin. It's French, it's Germanic, it's all these different types of influences. So I think that's one really cool thing that Mrs. Barney did. And another thing she did, which is simple but also helpful, especially with some of these more complex or lesser known words, is to work with synonyms. So she started with the word night, and they worked together to find synonyms or similar words with similar meanings And some of the words they came up with were warrior, defender, gallant, and protector. And then once they kind of did an I do, then Mrs. Barney pushed them and they were allowed to get into groups and find other words on their word wall that they wanted to find synonyms for. And that's really great because it's helping them draw connections between words. And the more connections and the more time you spend on the words, the more they're going to understand them. So that's my sort of summary of what Mrs. Barney did. There was a lot more to it, but I think those were the key things, and I think that especially the word wall is so helpful, and I'm definitely going to use the word wall for thematic units and for words that we use every day in the classroom. So there you go.